Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Tarnowieski, and this particular presentation or panel discussion, or whatever you want to call it, is titled "The Implicit Meanings Are Explicitly Wrong: Religious Anti-LGBTQ plus Dogma." And our presenters today are from the student Weatherford College student group, S.A.F.E, S-A.F.E, Strong Acceptance Freely Echoes. And their presentation is led by Michael Samuels, who, if I remember correctly, is the president of S.A.F.E. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Courtney Thom. Is that Thom?
Thom, H is silent.
Okay, all right. Who is the vice president of the same organization. And with that, I will step out and allow them to do their discussion.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody that has come to listen to us. Feel free to, at any time, enter in your question into the chat. We can't see you in this Zoom call, so the best way to contact us if you have a question is to go through chat. With that, I'm going to share my screen and do my presentation. All right. So the title of this presentation is "The Implicit Meanings Are Explicitly Wrong: Religious Anti-LGBTQ plus Dogma." And you have already seen us introduced. So we're going to go right towards the goal of this presentation, and that is to provide some context of the modern ideas of religious freedom, including the limitations of it. We're going to insert the classic idea of religious freedom into the current discourse on the LGBTQ plus community, specifically around the legal restrictions that the community faces. So first, I'm going to introduce John Locke. He is who we're going to base our idea of classic religious freedom upon. So he's the father of liberalism. His political theory kind of centers around the idea that people consent to be a part of the government. And the biggest goal of the government, the whole purpose of it, is to protect life, liberty, and a state. So his ideas are something that echoes in our culture every day. We hear that life, liberty, and property every day. So he's very prolific. His writings are what inspired James Madison and the founding fathers who wrote the Constitution. He's kind of a big portion of why we have the First Amendment. So if you want to look at a classic idea of freedom, you're going to look at John Locke. He made a piece of writing called A Letter Concerning Toleration. It defined religious freedom, the limits of it, separation of church and state, and the importance of tolerance in preserving political discourse. So these are all things that are very relevant today. So these are just some general ideas of what he thought about religious freedom, not specifically in the writing we're going to look at. But he essentially said that the goal of religious freedom is to promote diversity, is so that you have so many churches that believe different things that not one of them can gain too much control over anybody else. And it promoted tolerance, actually. It allowed people to exercise their own ideas of morals. And it also worked as a way for people to respect everybody else's dignity. It kept everybody else conscious of everybody else's identity and just emphasized the importance of respect. He also talked about the dangers of liberty too, interestingly enough. He said that unlimited liberty will eventually allow people to make malicious speech. And if we have total liberty, then we have no right to correct these people from making mean statements. So it's why tolerance needs to be maintained between people. It's why tolerance is so important, is because without it, we reach this dangerous point of people being allowed to say whatever they want, including things that are disrespectful to others or dangerous. He also believed that tolerance should be expressed in civil arguments. So essentially saying that everybody deserves respect and dignity. And it's more than putting up with somebody, it is true respect. So now we're going to get into the actual writings that he did. A letter concerning toleration. So first he starts out with defining what the church is. It is a religious organization. The member and the church both give consent to participate in these practices. And the government doesn't have a say in what rules these churches make and how they participate in the public. You even talk about evangelicalism and saying that you can share your faith with others and try to convert people. This idea of what the church is very common today. It's what we expect with religious freedom. So this is just, I add that in to say these ideas are everywhere. He is what we base our idea of freedom upon. So as I get further into this document, just keep that in mind. So now I'm going to get into the limits, kind of the middle part of this paper. He talks about how churches can't put civil punishments on their members. A church can't charge you with a crime within the church. It can't fine you for something. This is an extension of the separation of church of state argument. And it also says that nobody can discriminate against another because of their civil activities or religious practices. Essentially stating that nobody can dictate to other people that they need to follow their personal religion. You cannot impress a religion upon people civilly. This is what he's saying in 1690. This is what he's saying, that a religion cannot be the basis of a civil law. And so continuing on with this, basically legality cannot be determined by religion. If something is illegal publicly, it's not legal in a religious context, and vice versa. Something can't be made illegal because it's a religious activity. And so he talks about the dangers of letting one sect of a religion believe that they hold impunity over civil law and believing that they are better than others or have more of a right to make laws than somebody else. So here are some examples that he gave. He said that breaking contracts with people because you learn of a difference of religion definitely is not protected under religious freedom. He says that feeling that you have the correct religion for everybody is also not something that is included in religious liberty. And something I thought was interesting is believing that somebody is not fit for office because of their difference in religion. And it reminded me a lot of when Mitt Romney ran for president. And I know that I was young, I was 12 when this happened, but I still remember when hearing a lot of discourse about, oh, he's part of the LDS church and what will that mean? And I grew up in a Baptist school, and so there was a lot of talk about that. There was also a lot of discourse about if Obama was secretly Muslim. There was a lot of talk about that. So these are some things in the news that they're older stories now, but it's just interesting to see that tie into something that Locke talked about so long ago. So what are the exact limits according to Locke? Essentially, he says anything that undermines political stability due to exemption from civil law or affects people's liberty because of the power held by any religious organization or ideology is not condoned under religious liberty, according to Locke. So anything that undermines political stability, essentially. So we have two categories of this. You have the exemptions and the coercive holding power over others. So let's get into those a little bit more. So when we look at the exemptions, we see that something that isn't protected according to Locke is the belief that somebody should be allowed exemption from civil laws or requirements due to their own religious beliefs. So think about some examples. I'm not going to get into the one you're probably thinking of, which is vaccinations. That is a whole other conversation I'm not going to get into, but just think about it. And then we'll go over some examples. So we're the S.A.F.E Club. We're going to talk about LGBTQ examples. We're going to talk about Kim Davis, who refused to fill out marriage licenses to same-sex couples, and also dictated that her entire office not fill out the marriage licenses after Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015. And we think that this is an old story, but she only got turned down by SCOTUS in October last year. So it's been ongoing for a long time. Is this, a violation of religious freedom? And according to Locke and SCOTUS, it is not. You can't impress or be exempt from doing something legally because of your religion. Another thing to think about, private higher institutions being exempt from Title IX. You have a lot of these institutions that are exempt from Title IX, and they use that to be able to say that you can't have LGBTQ plus clubs. Like this club and what we're doing right now is not allowed to happen at Baylor, for example. And there are a bunch of other schools in this specific class action lawsuit that I'm talking about. There's about 30 of them actually. But Baylor, the students that are suing from Baylor have noted that when they came to admin talking about being harassed for being a part of the community, they were told that they should go to counseling for their struggles. And yet Baylor still receives federal funding. So just something to think about. What would Locke think about this? And in the context of religious freedom that our country has been built upon, what does that show? So this is what Locke said. This is a quote from a different one of his writings, but I felt like it was still pretty applicable to this. He says, "And thus every man, by consenting with others to make one body politic under one government, puts himself under an obligation to everyone in that society to submit to the determination of the majority and to be concluded by it, or else this original compact, wherein he with others incorporates into one society, would signify nothing and be no compact, if he be left free and under no other ties than he was in before in the state of nature." Essentially, he's saying, like, if you don't follow the laws, if you don't follow the majority, you are not a part of the society. Society is meaningless if we cannot all agree to follow through with the majority that we have come to the conclusion upon. And if we don't all agree, then we're going to see political instability, which is somebody who born in 2000 and has grown up through the whole political climate. It's all that I know is political instability. It's all that I've seen in the last 20 years. There's another issue of if you base exemptions on religion, you're going to have to prove that you believe that religion, or you're going to have people just saying, oh, I am this, therefore I should be able to get out of that. And there's no real way to prove if you actually believe a certain way, besides trusting somebody. And so if we're allowing whoever claims to believe a certain way to get out of certain civil duties, then we're essentially undermining the law, and we might as well not have it. So these are some ideas that Locke might have thought of in this time. And so here are some things Locke said in this paper that you can glean from it. So he said, due to the separation of church and state, a church can't legalize or illegalize an activity. Exemptions that are harmful to others in society are also not protected. And any group, especially ones that are unverifiable, cannot undermine law without invalidating their societal agreement. So now we're going to get into the other category of religious liberty, which is the belief that one religion is superior to the civil rights of another. Essentially saying that one's religious liberty is supersedes another person's liberty. And in this belief, they attempt to institute laws to restrict the actions of another group or to force the other group to do things they wouldn't normally want to naturally. And so once again, I'll let you think of some examples of people in this situation. And then I will click on to the ones that I thought of, which were the Obergefell v. Hodges case. If anybody doesn't know the story behind that case, John Arthur was diagnosed with ASL and he was dying, and he had been with his partner Jim Obergefell for over 20 years, and they wanted to get married. So they raised $13,000 with friends and family, rented a private jet to fly them out to Baltimore, and Arthur's aunt married them on the tarmac in Baltimore, where same-sex marriage was legalized at the time. And then they flew back to Ohio, where they were originally from. And then when Arthur died months later, Obergefell sued to get onto Arthur's death certificate listed as his spouse. And originally they said yes, and then people sued, and he was taken off of the death certificate I think a year later. And so Obergefell with several others ended up suing, and that is what led to the Obergefell v. Hodges conclusion in 2015 that same-sex marriage was legalized and had federal protections. So in that case, you see people using their own definition of marriage to essentially say that some people shouldn't be allowed to get married. Some people shouldn't have those civil rights granted to them because of my definition of religion. And so you have to think about what Locke would say. So that's one example I found. Another thing is 26 states out of 50 do not ban religious conversion therapy, and the rest of them don't. Some of them don't fully ban it. So you have a lot of leeway to do whatever you want in these conversion therapy camps. There is, you can look up stories about what goes on, but it's traumatizing what happens in these conversion therapy camps. And you look at research behind what it does. The APA found that it did not do anything. The American Psychology Association found that it did not statistically reduce chances of having same-sex attraction. So it doesn't even work, and yet it's still legal in the majority of states. The Human Rights Campaign, HRC, also stated that those that undergo this kind of therapy are 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs, 6 times more likely to report severe depression, 8 times more likely to commit suicide, and 3 times more likely to be at high risk for STDs. So you can see that it doesn't provide any benefit if you want to call not having same-sex attraction a benefit. It doesn't do what it is claiming it does, and it comes with a lot of negative effects as well. So think about this in the context of Locke, like you're allowing people to go through a very harmful experience statistically because of your own religious beliefs. So another thing I'd like to highlight is the struggle that transgender youth go through and transgender people in general. I think that they can be swept under the rug a lot in these conversations. And so there are 29 bills currently that are trying to prevent transgender youth from receiving medical care, gender affirming care. One in Texas, House Bill 68, basically makes it so that if you help a child transition, it's considered child abuse, and the doctor and the parent will receive criminal penalties. So that is what's going on in Texas. In Arkansas recently, a couple of weeks ago, they passed a law saying that basically there would be no gender affirming medical care for transgender youth, completely taken away. They're the first state in the country to do this, but there are a few more with legislation like this trying to get passed, like Alabama, that would make it a felony for providing gender affirming care to transgender youth. And then there's the Florida bill. It's passed, but it's probably dead. They probably won't get to it until next year. So it probably won't be heard, but it's still passed, essentially giving schools the right to check female athletes' testosterone levels to ensure that they weren't trans. So you're essentially requesting private medical information to ensure that athletes are born in the way that you would like them to participate. And so you have to think about, what would Locke say about this? Is this impressing your religion onto somebody else? Is this impressing a religious ideology onto somebody that, to the point where it restricts their liberties? It restricts their ability to be who they want to be. And a lot of these, nearly 30 bills, aren't just criminal offenses for the doctors. It's also to the parents that are allowing their child to transition. A lot of these laws are essentially stating it's child abuse to allow your child to express themselves. Essentially saying that their liberty, they're allowing their child to be comfortable, is a crime. So think about that in a Lockean way. What would he think about this? And then below is a list of the 15 trans people so far that have been murdered this year, the youngest of which is 16. And that is just in the last 4 months. I think that transgender people get swept under the rug a lot in these conversations. So I felt like writing out their names so that people would know who they are. And so let's think about the coercive religious freedom or liberty. This is another quote from John Locke from the second treatise of civil government. The quote is, "The end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. For in all the states of created beings capable of law, Where there is no law, there is no freedom. So essentially, if you allow people to do whatever you want or whatever they want, if you allow people to do everything, you aren't going to have any freedom, because there will be those that gain the most power and then exert their opinions onto everybody else. So the law is what keeps citizens free, and that is the purpose of the law, is to keep people free. And so two more reasons that were stated by Locke is coercive religious liberty allows the liberties of some to encroach on the rights of others. So when you have too much liberty, you're allowing people to control others. And you can't have a person claim to hold power, person not claim to hold power given by religious beliefs. So you can't use your religion as a way to tell somebody what they can and can't do. And so this is Locke. This is 1690. These are not new ideas. They're just being repopularized. And so we've talked a lot about what the religious limitations are, but what is religious tolerance for Locke? And that's kind of up to the discretion of the reader. He determines that religious liberty shouldn't supersede civil law or hold power over anybody else. And that is essentially where he leaves off the conversation. To me, tolerance is not just saying, not being just silent. Tolerance is not just being silent on the issue. It is being respectful and being willing to engage and being kind to others above all else. And so tolerance is open to your discretion. And so that's something that you can think about too, as this presentation ends and the rest of the day. So we do have a call to action. Today is actually the day of silence. It is a day that is set aside to talk about LGBTQ plus harassment. Typically today, what people do is they would walk around, it's normally done in schools, but they'd walk around school with duct tape over their mouth, and I cannot do that today. It's funny that I'm giving a speech on the day of silence, but they are going to be doing a virtual celebration. So the call to action is to go online, go to www.glsen.org, go to the Day of Silence page, and watch the rally that's going on at 6 p.m. There's going to be people speaking about their own experiences, and they are going to tell you probably a lot of things you never knew about LGBTQ plus experiences. And so I invite you to take part in that and to sit in thought about what I've said, the news sources I've talked about, all of the things that are going on in this country, and how the LGBTQ plus community interacts with religious freedom. And this is a quote I thought was quite interesting, somewhat ironic, but it goes, "New opinions are always suspected and usually opposed without any other reason but because they are not common." Also by John Locke. And so we obviously still see this. And so I thought it was interesting that Lockean ideas recontextualized into modern situations are still suspected and opposed, even though these ideas are 300 plus years old and what we've built this country upon. And below are all of my sources, the many, many sources. And now we are open to question and answers. I wanted to leave plenty of time if anybody had any questions about what I had talked about. So if anybody wants to enter in the chat any questions, I would be happy to talk through that.
If you could stop share screen.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, there we go. We have a question here. Let me get this out of the way. The quote about coerciveness from Locke. How do you justify those who feel who feel what you are doing is against the laws of the Bible in which the founding fathers were built? And I'd like to expand on that question because I had something similar when I was thinking, listening to you. And that is, you're using Locke, basing everything upon John Locke, which is sort of a original intent concept. Well, the people who would disagree with you on this would argue that because the founders, the country was founded upon Christian beliefs, so their position supersedes your position on religious freedom and that kind of thing. How would you respond to that kind of argument?
To me, I've always learned, and my perception of it was that the founding fathers were more deist than Christian. That was always my understanding of the founding fathers' relationship with religion. But I also think about the idea of what the founding fathers were afraid of and trying to fight, which was tyranny. They hated tyranny. They had just escaped England and being subject to unfair taxation and not having representation. And so the idea of letting one group build up so much power that they insert themselves into the lives of other people, that seems like the definition of what they were afraid of. And so I like to think about it in that sort of context rather than a strictly biblical context. I don't know all of the personal religious beliefs of all the founding fathers, but my understanding is that it's deist, and above all, they would want people to learn to live their own personal lives. So life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, not necessarily my pursuit of happiness over anybody else's. That's my take.
Are there any other questions? Just give me a minute in case they want to chat it up here.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking the question, by the way. It's very interesting to talk about.
Well, if that is all the questions we have, well then first of all, I would like to thank all the attendees for attending this particular presentation. It takes a lot of courage for students to step up and do this sort of thing in a professional conference, and double the courage because for people who are, let's say, some of a minority in our society and can feel and sometimes feel persecuted because of that. Thank you to Michael and Courtney for presenting today. We really appreciate it. Oh, we have something. Oh, thank you, Courtney and Michael. Do you have and with that being said, I thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you very much. Bye.